Now, President Trump's plan to deploy the National Guard to Chicago has ignited fierce opposition from Governor J.B. Pritzker and Illinois officials, who label it as a political motivated power grab, and critics accuse Trump of turning the military on American citizens. Then they need to do something about the crime in Illinois. They need to do something about the crime in Chicago. See, I realized this. I could have made this channel Democratic, leaning far liberal. I could have made this channel Republican, leaning far conservative, but I label this channel as the truth because, see, some things you will see me lean left, you will see me lean right, and some people, oh, you need to choose a side. No, I pick the side of America. I pick the side of the truth because a lot of times, a lot of you may, well, you know, that's not a bad liberal law. That's not a bad piece of legislation coming from the conservative, and you can be leaning left or right, but they continue to have this divide, and they want to divide the people. How do you think these political figures, how do you believe these political pundits continue to stay in power? Because they, in some regards, manipulate and trick the minds of the people to choosing a side. But no one just want to choose the truth. Oh, you talking about an independent? No, because a lot of independents, believe it or not, tend to lean a little bit liberal. And people always want to box you in a certain classification or a certain category. Whatever happened to the truth? We have all these Christians in America. And matter of fact, the foundation of Christianity in America has basically shaped some of the laws in our country. So if God, if Christ is the Holy Spirit, is in truth, then why can't the citizens of America be in truth? Why are you choosing a side? Choose the truth. Well, the Republicans are the most transparent and honest government, side that we've been on. No, they have not been. Both of these political bipartisan sides have been telling lies. Why we don't have the Epstein files yet? Huh? Free P. Diddy. That was a joke. But again, that's his own battles. But the point I'm making here, family, is when you just say, you know what? Why label myself as such? Let me just choose the truth. That's what I'm getting at here. Now, again, Trump accused of turning the military on American citizens. He has plans to send National Guard troops to Chicago. And I'm absolutely torn about this. But before then, let's hear this from the president's mouth himself. Let's listen in on this.
And after we do this, we'll go to another location and we'll make it safe also. We're going to make our country very safe. We're going to make our cities very, very safe. Chicago's a mess. You have an incompetent mayor, grossly incompetent. And we'll straighten that one out probably next. That'll be our next one after this. And it won't even be tough. And the people in Chicago, Mr. Vice President, are screaming for us to come. They're wearing red hats, just like this one, but they're wearing red hats. African-American ladies, beautiful ladies, are saying, please, President Trump, come to Chicago. Please. I did great with the black vote, as you know, and they want something to happen. So I think Chicago will be our next, and then we'll help with New York, and we're going to help with, and I think a lot of these people that you see on television, they are, including the people in this audience, they'll say bad things about me, and then they'll say, thank God he's here, because half of them got mugged, and they don't want to get mugged again. But they're, they work for they work for stupid people at a radical left, and they're made to do things and say things that they don't want to be saying. But the people right here are all happy.
Well, first, I want to harp on what he was stating about, first and foremost, President Trump, Black Americans, not African Americans. We don't know nothing about Africa. It's Black Americans. That's okay. You guys can chime in the comment section. Then second, these Black American women, there were also Black American men wearing Make America Great Again, wearing the red hats as well, not just the women. Again, when I listen to politicians, it's a reason why they say things the way they say it. We're not trying to start a divide, because first he said Black American women want them to come there and clean up the crime. Then he won the black vote. The black vote was male and female alike. So again, there's black males, there's black females, black Americans that want crime to decrease in Chicago. Now, Governor Pritzker of Illinois stating that this is a political move. In some regards, it is, because he's only going in the Democratic cities. Now, a lot of these Democratic cities are majority black in some regards and majority minority. Okay, unfortunately, because our people, ever since Lyndon B. Johnson has been in office, has been voting democratically because of the civil rights law that Lyndon B. Johnson signed into office. But no one is remembering what Lyndon B. Johnson said. And excuse my language for people who have church ears, this is a trigger warning already. But Lyndon B. Johnson said, if we sign this piece of legislation for civil rights for black Americans, we will have them niggas voting Democrat for the next 200 years. Well, black Americans, foundational black Americans, we're going into 70 years of voting Democratic majority, because the Democratic Party has been fear-mongering us to vote Democratic. And the only thing they've been giving us is lint in their pockets. The only thing they've been doing is giving us a ride along the campaign trail. And right before they get elected to office, they kick our asses out and they do nothing for the black community. And we're going to get, again, we're going to get into some of the alternatives that I believe that President Trump can actually do in regards of him deploying National Guard troops in a lot of these Democratic black cities. Because again, as I told you guys before, instead of the DC takeover, how about sending troops to Memphis, Tennessee? Because again, the National Guard, they've been taking over DC for the past 2 weeks or so, but the troops really need to be in Tennessee. Memphis, Tennessee is, if I can recall correctly, has some of the leading crime stats in almost every category in America. Assault, murder, larceny, theft. And I don't care what race they are, ladies and gentlemen, because when I walk outside my house, I don't want to get boom bap in the back of my head. Bop. I don't want to get robbed. I don't want to get killed. I don't want my cars vandalized. And ladies and gentlemen, I'm not going to lie to you. I live in a nice neighborhood, but there's crime to a certain degree that still occurs here. People shooting BB guns. And I know people, they're not doing it with people in the cars. Okay. These are not crimes where people are being assaulted, killed, murdered, carjacked in those regards, but it's still a level of crime. But I believe the National Guard needs to be deployed in my area. Absolutely not. But again, I want to touch on this because I think it's utterly important as we look at this in a very historic nature. Because do not forget, police came about from slave patrols and capturing slaves. And these slaves were Black Americans. Now, in the early 1700s, especially in South Carolina and North Carolina, slave patrols were established to surveil, capture, and return escaped Black American people, which is a system built on violence, racial terror, and control. And these patrols have sanctioned violent authority with no warrants, logs, or testimony, just forced to maintain white supremacy. Now, as Bruce Brocado and others noted, that these patrols are widely considered their precursors to modern day policing in America. Now, granted, I'm not trying to say that the National Guard troops are slave patrols, because again, as I showed you, a lot of the National Guard troops in DC were Black Americans. And believe me, when you go to Chicago and he deploys the Chicago National troops, a lot of them will be Black Americans as well. Because believe it or not, in a lot of these Black cities, these Black enclaves and Black communities, the National Guard of that state and or that area could be Black American. Now, when it comes to Chicago, Chicago itself doesn't have a National Guard, but Illinois has a National Guard. So it may be split 30, 40, 50, 50, so on and so forth. But family, as we look at this, and I'm just building up because I don't want people to think I'm trying to say that the National Guard are slave patrols, but I'm showing you the progression and the transformation therein. Now, as we look in 2025, the Trump administration began deploying, first of all, with DC, signing a crime emergency, even as violent crime have been trending downward. And these troops began carrying live T-series rifles, Okay, that's your M4s, your M16s, etc., which is escalating the federal presence in civilian spaces. And the plans were underway to replicate this in Chicago, as well as Baltimore, New York, San Francisco, Oakland, all of these, again, Democratic cities, despite local officials, including a lot of those Democratic leaders stating no emergency existed and that crime was statistically decreasing, that Chicago saw homicides down over 30% and shootings down nearly 40% in the past year. You have leaders like Hakeem Jeffries, Governor Pritzker, Mayor Johnson, Governor Moore call the action unconstitutional, politically motivated, and a reenactment of martial control over majority Black cities. And believe me, when I tell you this, I do agree with them in some regard. Again, crime has been decreasing, but crime will not stay decreased if you don't implement plans and strategies that will sustain and continue to decrease the crime. Now, you would never have zero crime. You don't have zero crime in Asia. You don't have zero crime in Europe. Okay. And I'm just naming some places and some areas where I've been where crime is very low. Like I can walk 2 or 3 a.m. in any part of Korea and not feel like something's going to happen. I can walk 2 or 3 a.m., 4 a.m. in Japan, okay, and feel like nothing will happen. Whether it be on the subway, public transportation, nothing will happen. Now, if you're doing dealings with the triad, the Japanese Yakuza, the Korean mafia, you have something to worry about, but I don't deal in those circles. So I can walk a lot of these countries and nothing ever happens to me. Okay. Because I'm not dealing with criminals. I'm not doing that. But when it comes to America, it doesn't matter where you are, essentially, especially if you're a Black man in America. Some people will say, well, you know, you're a Black man in America, you're most likely to be harmed by a Black person. Well, that's every race. Majority of white people will be harmed by white people. It's called proximity killings, proximity crime. People who you live next to, people where you go to bars and shops. The majority of that community, whatever race, ethnic, demographic they may be, will most likely, be harmed in some regards or crime committed upon them for people who look like them ethically or in some cultural sort of manner. That is just the way of the world. Oh, those Black on Black crime, well, there's white on white crime and there's Asian on Asian crime. But Black on Black crime is more exploited, throughout news media and legacy media more so than any other group. There's been mass shootings in schools. There's been killing of families in suburban neighborhoods that do not make prime time television. And majority of those crimes come from the white community. Again, if we're going to point out crime from one demographic of people, one racial people, then all crime needs to be reported at the same percent, at the same coverage than any other group. Because again, if you paint a certain amount of people as criminals, then when other demographics and other race of people see those people, they automatically have subconscious bias that they are committing a crime or just committed a crime. That's just the way the human psyche works. And believe me, the government knows this. They do psych ops all the time. You continually running through an experiment here in America. They've done things for hundreds of years in this country. And they know how people will respond when they, again, deploy National Guards, federal troops, whatever they need. They know how the public will respond. Well, that's a good thing because they're going to crack down on crime. And if those blackies over there are going to do it, then they need to be incarcerated. They need to be deployed. They need to be deported. All these very white supremacist ideology. And again, I agree with some of the things that President Trump is doing, and I disagree with some of the things that President Trump is doing. But here's another kicker. When the Democrats and a lot of these Democratic-run cities had the presidency, the Senate, and Congress, why didn't you use some of the resources to decrease a lot of the crime in your areas? Not stating that you guys wasn't trying, but there's a lot more things that could have been done. Let me carry on. Now, here's the good. Potential immediate suppression of violence of high profile incidents. Because again, ladies and gentlemen, I really want to talk about the optics here, because the optics of divisive actions could reassure some communities. Now, just President Trump stating that he's going to send the National Guard troops to Chicago could automatically decrease crime. Okay, because your pea shooter against an M4 with 240 rounds of ammunition could deter a lot of crime. Believe me, I know. A show of federal resolve in cities plagued by chronic problems, signaling that help can come fast. Now, as this new term YNs are, being more vicious than any other demographic or lineage group of people that live in a lot of these black cities, these YNs have been more notorious, supposedly. So again, this could be a deterrent, because deploying federal troops without state requests likely violates the Posse Comitatus Act and Insurrection Act that may bypass governor authority. He may use some of this legislation to deploy these troops. And like he stated, Chicago, New York, San Francisco, Oakland, all of these other places. But the martial presence in civilian life fosters fear, not cooperation, especially in communities historically over police and over surveilled. And believe me when I tell you this, a lot of the black areas are over police and over surveilled. I guess I won't say my only problem, but one of my problems is this. What about the innocent civilians that do not deal in crime in those areas and unfortunately only have the funds to live in a lot of these low income areas? What about those black American citizens? They can't control the crime themselves. They don't have the resources, even if if they call, they're in danger of their lives of being snitches. So this is why I'm torn. You get what I'm saying? I want Black American citizens who are out there, regardless of your income status, whether you in poverty, just above poverty, living paycheck to paycheck, middle class, but you cannot afford to live in a neighborhood that don't have high crime. I do want them to live safe, harmonious lives without a lot of the crime in these areas affecting them and being harmed by them and their family members and friends. This is why I'm torn. But I will say that focusing on cities that are led by Black Democratic mayors like Mayor Johnson of Chicago, while ignoring similar or worse problems in majority white areas undermines credibility and fairness. Do this for the entire country. Every state has a National Guard, President Trump. Don't just do this to back the midterms of next year going against your Democratic opponents. Do this for America. When we say America first, let's really mean America first. Let's not mean Republican first. Let's not mean Democratic first. Let's not mean independent first. Let's really mean America first and do this everywhere, even in Republican ran states. As I told you, Tennessee. What about Houston? What about Dallas? Let's do it. Oh, you don't want to upset Governor Abbott? He's been one of your strong supporters. No, if this is America first and we want to decrease the amount of crime here in America, then let's do it everywhere. Because here's the ugly. The echoes of slave patrol violence. Let's not forget about that. The militarized force entering communities that are majority Black without consent, reinforcing centuries-old patterns of oppression and racial control. Political theater disguised as security policy using fear rather than funding. Reform, or even community empowerment. And this is what I've been saying. The millions and billions of dollars that the Democratic Party that used up to support illegal immigration. And this is why you have, believe it or not, ladies and gentlemen, you have a very large population of Black people in Chicago that voted for President Trump that wears their MAGA hats because of the Democratic Party imposing illegal immigrants in their areas. Again, they uprooted, they evacuated, they vacated Black community centers, Black churches to house illegal immigrants. They had illegal immigrants living better than the Black citizens. So again, when I look at what President Trump is doing, do I totally disagree? I cannot. As I told you before, I'm very, very torn behind this. Because believe it or not, ladies and gentlemen, majority of Black Americans are in the middle class. But unfortunately, a lot of our people are still living in squalor. And again, there is a lot of historical context of the reason why our people still live in squalor. And I can give you a psychological breakdown because some people are like, well, things will change if you just get an education, if you just get that. When people say post-traumatic slave disorder, or they're saying that you have a generational curse, and I even did a breakdown years ago on Facebook, generational curse part 1 and 2. It's been years, more than 10 years ago, I did that breakdown because I don't think people understand how trauma is passed down generation to generation. I just came back home from DC. I saw family on my father's side and I saw a family on my mother's side. And when I look at some of my family members on my mother's side, I see a lot of that trauma that has been passed down from my mother's and her sister and her brothers to us. And then I've seen how our grandmother and grandfather passed down some of that trauma. And again, I'm just trying to give you a little bit of context because these are not excuses. These are not reason because of the crime that are in a lot of these Black Democratic cities. This is just the cause. And now we have the effects. But again, I may do a video to break that down even further. So you guys, again, can be provided with more context. I just want to really think of how the Democrats could have used a lot of the funding, a lot of the reform, instead of with illegal immigration, they could have used it for a lot of the Black communities that really needed it. Because believe it or not, a lot of Black Americans do not want crime in their neighborhoods. Because more times than not, when you have high crime or when you just have a certain threshold of crime in your neighborhood, sometimes you can be sucked in. You can be walking down the street and there's a gang member or there's somebody who's doing something illegal and you accidentally bump into them or you accidentally cross their path and then something occurs. I don't want that for anybody, and I definitely don't want that for Black Americans. Now, as I stated before, there are some things, some alternative paths that President Trump, I believe that could be, again, suitable solutions to curtail, to decrease the amount of crime in a lot of these cities and not deploy National Guard troops. What about invest in community-based policing and social services where you actually have police to walk the beat as they used to and make connections with the citizens in those areas? And as I said this before, ladies and gentlemen, if you do not want crime in your area, then we need to start motivating and pushing our children into law enforcement. We need more foundational Black Americans in law enforcement. We need to start to police our own. Because when one of these Black men or women show a certain look on their face of anger or disparaging, instead of a white cop pulling that gun, that Black cop can lend a hand. Hey, brother, I know what you're going through. I've been there. Nah, cop, no, you just a pig. You just that and the other. Brother, listen, I went to Ballou High School. I went to Cardozo High School. I went to Mackenzie High School. I went to Calvin Coolidge High School. I just lived down there in this area here. I lived off Good Hope Road. I lived in Anacostia. And you can start to relate to a lot of our people. You see what I'm saying? And I'm just showing there was some references in high schools in DC, but the same in Chicago, New York, Oakland. It doesn't matter where it is. In the majority of these Black areas, I'm telling you to start motivating and pushing your children into law enforcement. I guarantee, okay, and this is my conjecture, I guarantee not only will crime decrease, we will have better law enforcement relation with the community. We really need to be flipping the script towards youth programs, mental health, and conflict resolution, targeting root causes. Because when I saw a video, they was doing some crackdown in an area in DC. I saw all these Black youth this outside. And the first thing that came to my mind was, why you're not doing your homework? Why you not being constructive? Now, granted, kids should go outside and play, but it is, again, they have created this depiction of Black people outside hanging about, and some of them trying to stay in style when their pants sagging. Again, I may not agree to that, but that is no reason to paint a negative connotation on people by the way that they're dressed or that they're just hanging out. Again, I'm torn. Because in some regards, when I lived in the hood, when I lived in the ghetto, when I was young, we had to come home and do our homework. And granted, when we did go outside, we couldn't really leave the block. And when things occurred, we had to go inside. I lived in Southeast DC, where people would seem like they were shooting almost every night, where we had to hit the floor. So when I went to the military, I was like, oh, I already know some of this training, unfortunately. As a child, a lot of, again, I tell you, I'm torn. A lot of us have trauma because the way in the area that we were raised. I wasn't out there in gangs and selling drugs and shooting up people or nothing like that. No, but there are some occasions, in some regards, I did get sucked in. But not for the reasons that you think. But I was part of a gang, but I wasn't a part of a gang. I was like an honorary member because some guy from another gang, okay, and I'm not gonna speak the gangs here. I'm not gonna put the gangs out there. But when I was in high school, I forgot, I was in 9th or 10th grade, and there was a young man from a gang. I wasn't in a gang, but I was in all these programs. I did swimming, football, chess club, DECA, smart kids. I was in all these. I was in choir. I was in show choir. I was in all these different clubs in high school. I was in a gentleman's club. And this is Cardozo Senior High School. This is a school I went to in Washington, D.C. But nonetheless, this kid bumped into me purposely. He was smaller in stature. And, I pushed him after he bumped into me because he was like, man, I pushed him or whatever. And so when I was about to leave school, I swear it was around 30 people outside from this gang. So I left out the back of the school and they had a person watching out. And so long story short, I ran for blocks. Okay. I ran for blocks. There was about 3 or 4 of them that could kind of keep up with me, but they were probably about anywhere from 30 to 50 yards away. I ran inside this mechanic shop. It was a Hispanic mechanic shop. I said, can you guys please help me? They told me go hide in the office. Some guys ran in there, hey, did you see somebody come through here? Oh, I think he went that way. And so, they kept running that way. I think I waited for like 2 or 3 hours before I left. So the very next day, when I got to school, I spoke to the quarterback. He was clicked in with a group within the school, had a strong presence just as well as this other kid, okay? And I told them my issue. They said, you know what? We're going to have a sit down today at lunch. And we had a sit down at lunch, and they kind of made me an honorary member of their gang. Okay. And so when I got sucked in, I started to hang out because I live literally maybe 3 or 4 blocks away from this area where this gang operated at. And I was hanging out there. I think I hang out there 2 days in a row. And they was telling me, say, hey, man, you don't have to hang out here, man. We know you in school, you're in all these programs. You shouldn't be out here like this now. Like, listen, something come your way, we got you. We're going to protect you. but you don't need to be out here. There's some things that go down out here. We don't want you to be involved in this. And I was like, oh, and I went home. So again, that could have easily went the wrong way. They could have embraced me more and trained me and nurtured me in a way that they saw fit, but they didn't, thank God. But when it comes to the programs, that's what the Black community is actually lacking. A lot of these low cost or free resources that illegal immigrants were getting, because adding resources for training, de-escalation, oversight, instead of deploying armed troops. I took a class in DC for young Black men to, when you're being pulled over, how to handle the police. And now I live in Texas. When I got pulled over, let's say 2 or 3 weeks ago, I bought myself a new car, got a couple of horses under the hood, got pulled over. Let me tell you what the training did for me. First and foremost, I pulled over. I rolled down all my windows. I keep my car clean. I don't keep a bunch of junk or nothing like that inside of my car. I rolled down all the windows and I had both of my hands on the steering wheel like this, ladies and gentlemen. And a police officer came. He said, how you doing? I said, I'm doing well. He said, do you know why I pulled you over? I said, absolutely not. And by the way, never tell the police or give them any information of why they pulled you over. Don't help them with their investigation. By the way, let them do their job. That's why they get paid. He said, well, you know, the speed limit is 70, 75. I clocked you at 98. And I saw you hit your brake, which went down to 96. I'll say, oh, well, sir, I had no knowledge I was going that fast. I'm not going to lie. I opened that thing up. I got that new car and I opened that thing up right there on the tollway. But he said, well, let me see your license and registration. So my hands are still here. I said, is it okay if I go inside my glove box and get the information? He said, sure. Now, this was during the day, but this has happened to me during the night as well, where they flash a light and I keep one hand on the steering wheel and I open up the glove compartment, get my information, hand it to the officer and put here. Then once he go back to his cruiser, I didn't relax. So after like 5 minutes, he comes back. I see him in the rearview mirror. I put my hands back on the steering wheel. He said, well, here you go, sir. He said, I said, and when he came, I said, I usually don't speed, officer. I really just, abide by the law. He said, I can tell. He said, sir, I don't see anything on your record. I don't. He said, I look back 10 years. You don't have anything on your record, like not even a parking infraction. He said, sir, and this was a white cop, by the way, I do not want to mess up your good record. Now, to be totally honest, last year, the same thing happened to me again, and the police officer said the exact same thing. Different police officer, both of them white, in Texas, no less. But they both said the same thing, meaning that if you are good majority of the time, you probably have a better outcome with the police than other people who don't have that same result. So again, some of the alternative solution that that President Trump can actually do instead of sending National Guard troops is to invest in these communities. But again, I know people want things to be done very, very quickly. As I told you, President Trump is moving at warp speed, but he can offer a federal grant 6 months to reduce violent crime by a certain percentage. Think about that. A lot of these Black Democratic cities have not been getting proper funding unless when it came to illegal immigration. What about funding a lot of these programs? How about giving these cities grants so they can hire more police officers, so they can encourage the youth of these communities to join police before they get a criminal record? And then say, okay, listen, we're going to give you, let's say $10 million so you can increase the budget, you can have more resources, you can hire more people, you can have more community activists, and you can pay them to get inside these communities. And by 6 months' time, we want to see a 25%. We want to see a 35% reduction of crime. We need technical assistance, not tanks. What about if we strengthen the grant-based federal partnership, not federal intervention? What about more federal funds? Use those tax dollars. Empower local leaders through funds tied to reform metrics, not martial law presence. Again, we know politicians are crooked, so have crooked politicians, okay, oversight committees by crooked politicians, and then you might have some fairness that the money actually goes to the citizens. Ladies and gentlemen, I want the best for America, because what we're seeing isn't just policing. This, in some regards, is a militarized reenactment of the same oppressive lineage that birthed policing in America. And granted, I know that there's Black, Hispanic, Asian, and white National Guard. And as I showed you in DC, the National Guard was majority Black. But that doesn't take away from the militarization and the reenactment of some of the oppressive lineage that has been birthed in America. This force first approach echoes of slave patrols now draped in modern uniforms and rifles. So instead of empowering cities, which the Democrats should have done, as well as other administrations that were Democratic or Republican, instead of empowering cities to heal and reform, the administration opts to dominate. That is why a lot of people say, oh, this is authoritarianism. This is enacting martial law. I'd even say that some of those same things. But turning progress into a battleground, it's a spectacle that courts fear when you really look at this from a holistic standpoint. This fuels resistance and it blurs the republic. It doesn't blur democracy. Let's base it off the Constitution. This blurs the republic. So again, President Trump, there are alternative ways, but let's be real. I think he has his mind made up. And as I told you throughout this broadcast, I am torn. Because in some regards, I want safe environments for my people. I want men and women who are out there on their grind, who's beating feet, who's working hard, who's trying to make a way for themselves and their families to feel safe in their communities, no matter how much money they make. Then the other part I'm torn is that what policing in America has been doing to the Black communities around this nation for quite some time. Not all police deal in brutality, but unfortunately, there's enough of them who are very brutal.